Is human nature stronger than sacred vows? Don't leave before you discover the secret, whispered on the night wind, that shattered a vow of silence forever. Because in 1491 CE, the chilling North German landscape pressed hard against an isolated monastery, built not just of mortar and stone, but of severe discipline and absolute spiritual commitment, designed to withstand the volatile world outside. Yet even in this sealed environment, the persistent, unpredictable currents of human longing found a way to flow, setting the stage for an incident the Church would later brand with the heaviest term it possessed: Scandalum Maximum. Can a sacred oath truly imprison forbidden desire? Step into the world of iron-bound gates and find out why they believed stone walls could contain human nature, as you stand at the threshold feeling the uncompromising cold emanating from the thick wood, imagining the regulated, silent, watchful atmosphere where life was a carefully constructed ecosystem of faith, sustained only by unwavering separation. But the external world finally breached this sanctity, not with a hostile army, but with the necessary mundane act of maintenance, creating the fatal flaw where earthly hands were needed to keep the sacred space whole. What happens when holy isolation meets forbidden desire? You won't believe how this story begins. When a small delegation of monks, dispatched from a neighboring precinct, arrived under the pretense of necessary repairs, skilled in masonry and carpentry, sent to address the wear and tear of time, a persistent threat to all medieval structures. But their required intrusion disrupted the silent harmony of the enclosed community, shifting the rhythm of life with the scraping of tools, the smell of fresh-cut wood, and the unavoidable sounds of outside voices filtering through the monastic quiet, raising the stakes, masked by the ordinary tasks of preservation, introducing a dynamic element that the strict rules could not account for. How did a simple repair job lead to the ultimate betrayal? This is how proximity destroyed purity, because the monastery was architecturally designed to repel, its inner spaces protected by a thick perimeter wall, a tangible symbol of the spiritual barrier. But that very wall needed the most attention, forcing the monks to focus their repairs near the convent's secluded wing, a place where light barely penetrated, and their labor placed them physically close to the enclosed nuns, violating the unseen yet profound boundary. And this proximity, however innocent in its origin, acted as the initial breach, allowing curiosity and observation to replace disciplined indifference. What small gesture can destroy years of discipline? Discover the terrifying cost of enforced proximity coupled with absolute prohibition, because you are within a hand's reach of another, yet separated by years of solemn commitment and cold stone. Wondering what small gestures might be exchanged: a dropped tool, a momentary gaze held too long, the soft sound of a cough echoing across the yard. These were the dangerous, tiny violations. And historical records from the court inquisitions dated 1491 speak to the immediate shift in the atmosphere, suggesting an almost gravitational pull between the repairmen and the cloistered, hidden just beneath the surface of enforced piety. How did two nuns use the shadows to start a terrifying ritual? This is how the deepest quiet gave birth to transgression, because the historical documentation is precise, detailing how the scandal first unfolded under the veil of night, when the rhythm of human interaction, conducted in the deepest quiet, formed the initial transgression, establishing a pattern where two specific nuns, driven by what they later termed human weakness, would leave the secure confines of the inner yard, moving silently, utilizing a shadowed, secluded section of the wall, the very structure the visiting monks were tasked with mending, as the darkness became their unwitting confessional and their sanctuary. Why did they risk absolute ruin just for a conversation? Understand the desperate ritual of forbidden escape, because the meetings themselves were a carefully orchestrated ritual, occurring behind the formidable stone structure, positioning the individuals in a narrow, forgotten space that maximized both darkness and acoustic concealment. where the focus of the initial encounters, according to later testimonies, was conversation, a desperate exchange of human emotion and genuine feeling long denied by the monastic life, raw expressions of isolated souls connecting across a dangerous divide. And the sheer audacity of these nightly ventures elevated the risk exponentially. Could you withstand the silence required for this forbidden act? Uncover the silent audacity required to defy God and man, imagining the sheer, silent audacity required to slip away from the communal slumber, knowing the penalty for discovery was absolute ruin, where the air would be sharp and cold, the only witness the indifferent moon struggling through the clouds, understanding that the symbolism of the wall is paramount, a barrier meant to keep the world out, now functioning as the backdrop for the most private, prohibited human drama, as you can almost hear the soft, cautious footsteps on the damp earth, the quickened breath, the shared understanding that they were actively dismantling their life's chosen structure, brick by treacherous brick. What terrifying phrase did the church use to describe forbidden touch? The court records establish that these clandestine gatherings quickly moved beyond simple conversation, because the nuns' later confessions, while employing the careful, sanitized language of the church, admitted to expressions of emotional indulgence and physical closeness, suggesting a profound escalation, crossing the line from intellectual or emotional support into forbidden contact. And the severity of the transgression from the church's perspective was not merely the breach of rules, but the violation of the spiritual integrity upon which the entire institution rested, marking the moment the foundation began to crumble. Who lied first when the unthinkable was uncovered? This is the moment the moral conflict consumed the community, because when the investigation finally launched, the focus immediately fell on the specifics of the contact, and the monks, recognizing the catastrophic implications, fiercely denied any culpability, attempting to maintain the facade of their innocence and piety. However, the evidence lay in the agonizing, handwritten admissions of the nuns, who spoke of human weakness as an overwhelming force, a sudden vulnerability that bypassed years of training and renunciation. And this juxtaposition, the aggressive denial versus the remorseful admission, highlights the severe moral conflict consuming the community. How did human weakness become a terrifying euphemism? Place yourself in the interrogation room, not as the accused, but as the relentless inquisitor reviewing the confessions, and you see the carefully chosen words designed to avoid the explicit, yet the meaning is terrifyingly clear, as the phrase human weakness becomes a terrifying euphemism for the catastrophic failure of faith and discipline, where the psychological intensity peaks with the acknowledgement of an unstoppable natural force, the body and the heart, triumphing over the rigid framework of institutional expectation, marking the spiritual downfall before the physical collapse. What were the unwritten rules of the shadow zone? Discover the darkness where accountability vanished, because the entire episode unfolded in a zone of perpetual shadow, illuminated only by the faint light leaking from the small, high monastery windows. And this atmosphere speaks volumes. These acts could only exist where light and accountability were absent, meaning the secret meetings represented a deliberate choice to step out of the light of God's rule and into the dangerous, comforting anonymity of the dark. But what came next changed everything, as the discovery was not instantaneous, but rather a slow, creeping suspicion that solidified into undeniable truth. How did silence itself become a vessel for suspicion? Even before the formal investigation, the atmosphere within the cloister became unbearably tense, because silence, once a symbol of devotion, became a vessel for suspicion. As the behavior of the two nuns, subtle shifts in demeanor, fleeting glances, and unnaturally withdrawn quality betrayed the immense burden they carried. And the Scandalum Maximum was not just the physical act, it was the psychological poisoning of the community trust, where every gaze was interpreted, every accidental noise magnified, leaving the spiritual integrity of the entire convent under silent threat. What painful realization unsettled the powerful bishops? Consider the deep historical irony of institutional betrayal, because the institution designed to provide sanctuary and spiritual order was now actively tearing itself apart through internal betrayal, and you witness the painful disintegration of a sacred structure not through external pressure, but through a profound, private breach of trust.
where the core ritual of renunciation had been violated, suggesting that the most robust structures are only as strong as the human wills holding them together, a realization that resonated far beyond the local parish, unsettling powerful bishops. Why was repetition the ultimate sin in the eyes of the Church? This is how consistency transformed error into defiance, because the records confirm that the relationships established were not isolated momentary failings, but sustained repetitive violations conducted over several weeks, and this repetition transformed the acts from impulsive error into a deliberate defiance of the vow, making the transgression doubly severe. A failure of chastity compounded by the systemic breaking of enclosure, and the Church understood that allowing such an act to persist without severe condemnation would invalidate the very concept of monastic commitment across the region. Who finally noted the pattern that led to the full discovery? The discovery, historians suggest, was precipitated by an observant lay servant or a junior monk, noting the repeated pattern of nocturnal absence. And the detailed testimonies that followed, painful, drawn-out accounts conducted under clerical pressure, confirmed the worst, as the monks, despite their initial staunch denials, were ultimately implicated by the clear, consistent narrative presented by the nuns, meaning the full weight of the Church's condemnation was now inevitable, demanding a public, severe response to restore order and reassert absolute authority. How did the Church use one event to threaten the faith of millions? The immediate resolution was harsh and swift because the incident was documented not as a private failing, but as a public crisis. The Scandalum Maximum, a label reserved for events so severe they threatened the faith of the wider populace, suggesting an overwhelming triumph of corruption over sanctity. And the severity of the classification dictated the severity of the consequence, shifting the narrative now from the act itself to the institutional reaction. The calculated move to contain the damage and enforce ritual cleansing. Did extreme restrictions ultimately prove the fragility of power? You are left to contemplate the fragility of power and the inevitability of human downfall when placed under extreme artificial restriction, because the vows, poverty, chastity, obedience, were supposed to be shields against the world.
Yet they became a crucible for desperate acts. So look at the cold record, the names, the dates, the stark legal language detailing the spiritual wreckage, understanding that this wasn't merely a lapse, it was a devastating indictment of the impossible ideal demanded by the cloister. What kind of silence replaced the harmony of the monastery? Weeks later, the repairs to the physical wall were complete, but the invisible damage to the spiritual edifice was irreversible, forcing the focus away from the repaired stone back to the human beings involved. And the monastery, once a symbol of unwavering piety, was now synonymous with moral corruption throughout the region as the silence returned. But it was a different silence now, heavy, judgmental, and steeped in shame. What artifacts tell the hidden story of profound human suffering? The lasting artifact of this tragedy is the set of written confessions, because these documents, stored deep within the ecclesiastical archives, are more than mere legal records. They are symbolic objects of profound human suffering, as the elegant script attempts to formalize the chaos of emotion, using safe phrasing to describe a violation of dignity, a spiritual purge. But reading between the lines reveals the crushing weight of societal judgment imposed upon these individuals. Can you imagine writing the document that condemns your future? Imagine the isolation of writing a document that simultaneously condemns and defines the rest of your existence, and feel the empathetic echo of severe suffering, the absolute loss of standing, identity, and hope, because the Church required total contrition and acknowledgement of error, a psychological requirement that often outweighed the practical punishment, making the act of confession, in itself, a final ritual of condemnation. Blackjack were the names of the condemned erased from history. The implied outcome for those who commit Scandalum Maximum was unequivocal. Because while specific fates are often veiled in historical safe language, the involved monks and nuns met a tragic end to their chosen path, removed, isolated, condemned. Their names erased from the communal record where possible, and this administrative purge was deemed necessary to protect the collective soul of the remaining community and maintain the illusion of absolute purity. How did this one scandal change protocols forever? The story of the shadow vow became a cautionary tale, disseminated through the church network, a potent lesson in the absolute vigilance required to uphold the monastic ideal, serving as a stark reminder that the inner human landscape was often far more chaotic and volatile than any external threat. And the incident redefined the local protocols for interaction with outside workers, emphasizing an even greater degree of isolation. Did this betrayal plant the seed of doubt across the church? Did this incident truly strengthen the remaining vows, or did it merely plant the seed of doubt? The unsettling idea that if it could happen there, behind those strong walls, it could happen anywhere. You're welcome to continue the journey with us to explore this question. What feeling remains near the wall repaired centuries ago? The monastery stands today, a testament to endurance, its stone wall still bearing the marks of 15th century repairs. Yet standing near that specific, shadowed section, one cannot escape the deep, persistent atmosphere of what occurred. A historical ghost of human weakness conquering sacred resolve, where the silence is profound, but it is not empty. It is filled with the unwritten confessions. What does Scandalum Maximum truly mean for history? The chosen terminology, Scandalum Maximum, is the final, potent descriptor, freezing the event in time, marking it as the ultimate failure of ritual and control, reminding us that history is often defined not by grand battles, but by the quiet, devastating moments when human beings prioritized connection over commandment, defying the very structures designed to contain them. This video is created for educational and historical purposes only, examining themes of power, corruption, and human conflict without depicting explicit or graphic events. If this story made you reflect on the fragility of power, stay with us for the next chapter, as we delve deeper into history's most unsettling betrayals. Walk further into history's shadows with us.